Hello and welcome to the MRR Secrets podcast. I'm your host, Vianney Wilson. You can call me V, and I'm the master of shadows in this movement. And today with us, we have Robb Bailey from Robb Consulting, who has built multi-seven-figure profit businesses using SaaS, which is software as a service, and has 3 different revenue streams that bring in monthly recurring revenue every single month. So Robb, super excited you're here. Thank you for hopping on.
Thanks for having me, V. Really honored to be here.
Let's kick this thing off. I really appreciate you being here. I know that you're well known in the space, and honestly, when I put the thing out there, I was like, this would be a fun thing to do for like the MRR Secrets. Let's just learn the kind of stuff people have been doing. I was so surprised how many people raised their hand because I was like,
Oh yeah,
just like a fun thing that I was thinking about, and I was like, is that the Robb Bailey? Because I obviously know your name. I know the things you've been doing. I see you posting in the high level group and stuff all the time. And so I'm like, oh shit, I really want to interview this guy because, like, as far as SaaS and monthly recurring revenue, that's what you are known for, right?
yeah,
So, yeah,
So
really happy.
it's a really hot topic, and I think you're smart to cover it because, in markets like this, it's extremely sought after. It's like one of those things. It's like the elusive, um, it's like the elusive pot of gold. I think it's what because even people they start to learn like, hey, even if I have a good year, a good month, or whatever the case may be, and that's active income, man, it sure is nice when things aren't going the way I planned, or if something happens, like life event, or maybe you get sick, or whatever the case may be, that people start paying attention to it for sure. So I think it's really smart of you um, to not just cover like MRR, but like study it from people who have it. So like that's, I get asked all the time, sort of, what's your number one tip or whatnot, and it's really hard to choose like one thing to say to people with zero context behind them. But the number one thing that I always say, especially in 2023 more than ever, in other words, is that you should learn from someone who's already done it, right? That's like been a key to my success. So when I hired my first mentor, Billy Jean, the reason why I went to Billy Jean is because he was literally already doing the exact outcome that I wanted. And so
Yeah,
I threw a bunch of money at him to coach me one-on-one for 3 months, right?
yeah. Billie Jean's
And
big as
and
well.
like
Was he
literally
was he
everything.
big then already, or
Yeah,
yeah,
that was a long time ago. Yeah. So that was like 6 or 7 years ago at this rate. So,
yeah. That's
but
awesome.
if you're after MRR, it makes sense to go and talk to people who have already built up a ton of MRR because everyone's got opinions,
100%.
right? Like you can go into any group and be like, hey, what's your best strategy? But you're going to get opinions from that are not equally weighted, right? So you're going to get
100%.
opinions from people who have, under $100 a month in affiliate revenue. Okay, cool. That's rad, but that's not going to be
Yeah.
what most people want. I'm sure that's not what you want. It's just one,
No, for
it's
sure.
like,
And I
okay,
think that
cool, $40 a month.
yeah, yeah, woo! Every month for the next year, I'm gonna make $40. Like it's cool and that's
Yeah.
nice, but it's also not going to change your life, right?
Right.
But
Yeah.
I think it's
Yeah.
really interesting. Like I went through like a branding exercise, and I was kind of like, it used to be the way that I used to position myself with everything that I've done was it was like Vianney show, right? It was about me and stuff like that. And when I started creating the MRR Secrets brand, I felt such a relief because I was
Yeah.
like, it no longer has to be about me. I can actually just provide value. And I felt this pressure melt away of
Yeah.
like, you have to be perfect or whatever. It's like, no, other people have figured out way more stuff than you. Let's talk to them and share that
Yeah.
stuff. So, dude, so one of the things I was really interested in when I was looking at your stuff, we now have a snapshot of who you are now, right? So we understand multi-seven-figure businesses and stuff like that, and we'll get into that in a bit. But I'm always interested into knowing like how does someone get to where they are? Because there's going to be people listening who want to be like, how do I model what Rob has done, right? So
Yeah.
do you want to give
Yeah.
us like
Sure.
just a quick, maybe 3 to 5 minute rundown of where did you begin and how did you end up where you are right now?
Yep. Sure. So I started sort of my career off in like as a digital marketing agency owner, like a lot of us have in this space, right? So I made every mistake in the book on that one. I put my life, heart, soul, blood, sweat, tears into that thing. Did everything wrong. Like I just was learning as I went, right? And so I built that thing up to 7 figures a year run rate. And after 3 years, I had to shut it down. So my business partner and I had 3 years of just total chaos, basically.
Right.
And we had no two clients that looked the same. We were doing all custom work. We were underpaid, overworked. Some nights, if we had a big project that we had to get done just because we needed to pay the bills, that month, we would like sleep on the pizza boxes, and we'd wake up and there's like beer cans and empty pizza boxes, and we're like, whoa, what the heck?
Yes.
It's like, oh, we're on a bender, yeah, finishing a website build or something,
Right.
and so it wasn't for lack of effort. That's thing one. But thing two is that even though we had a ton of revenue coming in, there was literally no money left at the end of the month. So I made more money working in a bar, put it that way.
Wow.
It just, on the hourly, if you divided how much I made by the hourly, I was making some of the worst money I ever made in my entire life, right? So the model was broken. It was just super broken. Our We had scope creep. We underpriced projects. If we lost one client, we were immediately in the red for the month. That's how we started some months,
Wow.
most months, in fact. And so you just can't run a business for that long having it that chaotic. So I shut that thing down. Hand in hand, I sort of like made a YouTube video to get out of our sublease of our office space, and had to publicly put that up so that we could try to find someone who would take over our office unit.
Right.
And that was kind of like my low point, right? Like, I went home that night and felt like I let everyone down, my employees, my clients. It was kind of like the announcement of that, yeah, this is actually over, right?
Right.
So I was like crying, and I broke down in tears, and my wife was like, maybe you should just go get a job. This is a lot. And I was like, no, no, no. I feel like I can dissect this thing. I need like 3 months to just like figure it out. So what I did was I started looking into like recurring revenue and what people do in an agency setting and otherwise to basically, like, book more, if not all, recurring revenue in their business. And what I did was I printed out all of my QuickBooks entries that I ever had by line item, meaning what did I charge my clients for over those 3 years. And I had like two or three things that were recurring. One of them was Facebook ads for a local client that we had. And that actually was, like, by the hour, one of the highest ROI things that we did as an
Right.
agency. It was recurring and it was super easy to do, right, compared to everything else. There was a couple of other little things like web hosting and stuff like that, but out of thousands and thousands and thousands of entries, that number one made me realize how ludicrous it was to do custom work for that many different types of clients for that many different types of things.
Sure.
Like, how can you get good at one of them if you're doing thousands of them
Right.
per year, right? It's crazy. So that was thing one. And then thing two was I looked at the margin. It's like, if we just did more of that, we would have been way more successful, right? We would have had a ton of recurring revenue. It was really high. It was very easy to execute. Uh-oh, my camera lost.
No.
1 second.
It's all good. It's super interesting. Everything that you're saying so far, I think, is going to
Okay.
resonate a lot with people listening, right? Because, and
Yeah.
I come from the agency space too. I think a lot of us went that way because it seemed like an easier thing to do, right? Like offer
Yeah.
people things, then do a load of custom work. But what happens is exactly what you're talking about when it's set up that way, is that there is some of it which isn't monthly recurring, and then you also don't
Yeah.
have any structure in place to actually streamline anything. So it's just a hard
Right.
grind, right?
It's terrible. And it's you know, like the grind part of it, you can only do for so long. I mean, you really can't, it's not a sustainable way to run a business, right? Um, so I was kind of doing everything, and that really took a toll on me personally and professionally. And, like, we were having kids at the time, so it was just a phase of our life where I was
A lot of
sleep
stresses.
deprived in the first place. A lot of stresses. Yeah, it's like, how am I going to provide for these little suckers and all that. So I said, well, if we had just done like 100 times, our monthly revenue would have been consistent, profitable. I could have taught someone else how to do the actual work, like the fulfillment on it.
Right.
And that's when I became somewhat obsessed with Facebook ads for local businesses. So, um,
Okay.
that was the first aha moment for me. Was I would like, my effort was there. The inputs that I had, right, were not, they were not very, very sexy, meaning it was just like a lot of grunt work, etc.
Right.
But um, but it was just in the wrong buckets, if that makes sense. Like I was
Yeah.
doing the wrong things and working really hard at those wrong things. So it wasn't for lack of effort. It wasn't for lack of skills. We were very good at doing like search engine optimization, for example. It was kind of what we became known for. But our model was so stinking hard to run. It was like starting over every month. And
Right.
so I got really sick of that real fast. I mean, in a way, it's a total blessing, right? Because I think that if you go through something like that, you know exactly what you never want to do again, right?
Do you know what? That
So
is,
if you're sitting there saying,
yeah,
"Yeah,
that's a
go ahead,"
hugely
if
important
you,
piece of this, right? Just being like,
yeah,
this thing that I'm
so like,
experiencing right now, never again.
right. So think about that. Like if you're spending half your day in your business, you're like, God, I hate doing that. Like I literally hate it. I know it's not productive. Um, take a hard look at it, because if all you have to do is imagine doing that times 10 and then go, crud, if I grow my business, right, eventually I'm going to be doing this times 10. That's what I'm looking at with this model, right? And so if that gets to that point, am I going to be happy doing it? So you don't have to be as hard-headed and basically stupid as I was to stick with it for that long. In fact, I should have probably realized it after about 6 months, but I
Mm,
didn't. Right? I just kept trudging along. So if you stop though, and you can build some self-awareness, which I think is a great skill as an entrepreneur, is to build self-awareness, then you can go, okay, if I extrapolate this out and put my little fortune teller hat on and say, okay, and like if I 10x this and grew my business by 10x in the next year, 2 years, 5 years, whatever it may be, am I going to be happy doing 10 times the amount of this?
right.
Because I sure was miserable doing 1x, right? I was
Yeah.
super miserable. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's just the way it was. And so I had to the forcing to stop myself and come up for a breath of fresh air was critical. It was critical. So I did that, and then the other key thing, which we were talking about before you hit the record button, was just that I went and hired a mentor, right? And when I hired the mentor, he was already doing the thing that I wanted to achieve. So I hired that mentor. I said, "Give me the exact blueprint. I know your model's better. I see you doing it. I want the same outcome that you are getting, like the exact same outcome, and I want that, right? I want that in my life. I'm not afraid to work hard. I'm not afraid to follow directions. I'm not afraid to say no to more things.
Right.
Um, and I'll be the best student that you've ever had.
Yeah.
Take my money, right? That's kind of how that conversation went.
Yeah.
And then in about like 2 years later, I want to say it took us about 6 months to kind of get my head wrapped around what I wanted to do, um, as far as like a niche and specialization wise and everything like that. I was making money the whole way while I figured it out. And then I started a fitness based agency. We held 535 locations in 22 months. And then I ended up selling that agency. So that one was vastly different. I mean, I basically call it the tale of two agencies. One was a 7-figure failure and I hated it. And one was a 7-figure success and I loved it. It had way more profit margin. I had way more free time. We had a bunch of babies,
Right.
took them to the beach all the time, stayed home for them,
Amazing.
with them when they were growing up, like when they were little. Um, we flew all over the dang country and even out of the country once. So it was night and day different. I enjoyed it way more. My team was happier. My team could do the work and it was chill,
Yeah.
you know. So it was like everything was different. They're both a digital marketing agency. So on the surface, most people would go, "Oh, they were the same thing." And to me, I'm like, "No, they were not the same thing at all."
100%.
Right?
And that's super
So
important
that's
as well because it's like, as you were saying, I think a lot of people, especially newer people, people that haven't experienced one or the other, they're like, okay, this is
yeah,
an SMMA, right? The great branching of like all of those things. But as you said, your
yeah,
experience is different. And what I really like, if we just pull it out, like as something I think, if people are listening to this and you're experiencing difficulties in your current business, there's two things you said that I think are going to resonate a lot with people. One of them
yeah,
was just have a look at everything that you bill for and find the thing that's going to give you the highest recurring revenue, but also profit, and probably the thing that you can just focus on. Maybe that's
yeah,
something because a lot of people, my space, the people that I work with most are in the coaching slash consultancy space. And it's the same thing.
mhm,
People do loads of stuff that they hate and they're taking on clients that are paying this much, but they're taking a lot of time. They're doing others that are this. And it's just like, You could just find the thing that you like that pays you the most and just do only that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Like
Yep. And that's, I mean, that's a great segue to what I did next, because uh, right about the time I was selling, it was probably like a month or two before I sold my agency in the fitness niche. A friend of mine, Robin, said, "Hey, I just made this great new software for agencies. Are you willing to be in the beta group?" And I said, "Yeah, no problem. What does it do?" At the time, I had a $44,000 a month Scipio bill. Scipio is like a two-way text messaging
Yeah.
platform for businesses.
Okay.
Um, and they had no agency functionality. I had to sign up for by location an account for each location. So there was no agency view. It sounds silly right now,
Yeah.
doesn't it? I mean, that was only 5 years ago.
Yeah.
So, so immediately he had two-way text messaging and he had an agency dashboard view. And I was like, oh my gosh, how much are you charging for this? Like, take my money. And I was willing to pay $44,000 a month to him instead, because those two things would have saved our team about, I want to say it cut each person's the amount of time it would take each person to fulfill per client by about 90%.
Wow.
So it increased their capacity tenfold. That's another way to put it,
Yeah.
right? Because of the time saving features that came with it, right? So I was like, if I just get that, it's worth continuing to pay 44 grand a month. He said, "Hey, it's only like 297 a month for unlimited locations." I'm like, "You're high as a kite. Let's talk about this. Let me help you make some more money than that."
Yeah.
But fine, here's my money, And I ended up becoming their very first affiliate,
Cool. Okay.
and help them sell out of beta. Yeah, so I helped them sell out their beta group, like their first batch of paying customers, at a workshop that I did, and a training event that I did, and it was small. I think there was like 16 people there, but they're all like, "Yep, sign me up, sign me up, sign me up." So that was 5 years ago, and I've been with High Level ever since, helping them, promoting them. So as an affiliate, I've been building recurring revenue, and we can talk about how I did it,
Yeah.
but the result of doing that for 5 years, month over month, and building my recurring revenue is such that I could retire right now and not have any active income.
Right.
And that amount of money would, pretty much set me up for
Carry
life
on.
if I, yeah.
And
So
and then as well, so you took the skills that you had from before and you applied them to what was High Level 5 years ago. It's funny as well because it's such an amazing company that it's hard to think that that was only 5 years ago. Yeah.
yeah,
Like we use Go High Level. Basically, everyone I know uses High Level. Right.
yeah. In fact, right before this, someone had mentioned, because they just broke like 40,000 people in their Facebook group, which is a great milestone, right?
Yeah.
And someone said, just a few months ago, it was at 25K when I first came in. And so I was like, when did I first join? And it was December 17th, 2018 was the first time I joined their group. And so I think I was like one of the first 10 to join that group,
Wow.
and all that. And now it's at 40,000 people. And I've had the privilege of training over 20,000 of them over the years, right? At some point,
Wow.
whether it was a free thing, a paid thing, mentorship, whatever the case may be, we've trained so many people in that community, and it just keeps stacking and stacking and stacking and getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
Wow.
So I'm kind of obsessed with the compounding aspect of MRR. And I think it's over the long term, if you can take a little bit of a longer view, it doesn't even have to be that long, right? If you can think 3 months, 6 months, a year out to 5 years, and the longer the better, the more MRR helps you, right? The more your view of it, and the stableness and the foundational elements of it that will keep you moving forward in an additive way, right? In other words, last month, maybe you have $10,000 a month in recurring revenue, and the next month you add 1,000. So now you're at 11,000. And if you add $1,000 a month, it doesn't sound that sexy in month one, maybe, right? But by year 5, you're like, holy cow! It's just math,
That's just
right?
math. Yeah.
It's just math. It's like if you wish you were Warren Buffett, you should love this concept of compounding, right?
Right.
Because what ends up happening is you wake up one day and you've been doing the same things. The inputs have not changed. In fact, you're probably kind of bored by now, right? Because you've just done the same thing over and over and over again. But it's like real estate people love this too, because that's how they get rich as well. Is every month that someone else pays your mortgage down, you take your profit, but they pay the mortgage down, and you force equity into the equation, right? So if you look at a long enough timeline, this becomes very, very compelling really fast,
For sure.
right? Like 5 years is not a long time career wise. Most of us are going to work at least 30 years, probably more like 50 or 60.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you may as well take 5 years and do this.
Well, this is it. And I
That way
think
you,
it's a really refreshing point of view too, because certainly in the way that if you think the way that programs are sold, let's say we're selling to agencies or coaches, consultants, all of them are
yep,
sold as a quick win. Like none of them are taking, hey, let's take a realistic long-term position. How would your life look if you added 1K per month to your recurring revenue and you
yeah,
just did that? Like,
right.
for the first year, okay, cool, maybe 12K a year doesn't sound 12K a month doesn't sound that amazing because you could do that with two high ticket sales. But by the time you're in year five, right, and you're
Yeah.
48, whatever it is, $1,000 deep, that would be 4 months anyway, you're $60,000 in per month. That's some life changing stuff right there, right? And you haven't really
Oh
changed
yeah.
anything. It's amazing. So for you, what's the I guess it's really interesting. You've got that two different agencies that have had different experiences. The light bulb
Mhm.
moment for you, am I right in saying it was the
Yep.
moment where it all came crashing down and you had to really take a step back and analyze and say what on earth went wrong and what was right within this puzzle, within this mess?
Yeah. Um, well, that's so contextually. I just don't want to give like a one size fits all answer because that can be dangerous
Sure.
sometimes. I think in context like this. But for me, so I'm giving you. I'm not telling you guys what that this is applicable to all recurring revenue situations. But to me, the problem wasn't. Um, it wasn't like a surface level problem, if that makes sense. So, in other words, I was proficient in what I was doing for the clients. I had a good relationship with the client. Like I was doing a lot of things right, put it that way. Right. I was doing everything else right, it felt like at times.
Yeah.
Right. But what ended up happening was the human element of it. And I this is the part I want to be careful about. But like I cared. Like little things, like I cared. So the client would call me and be like, hey, you know, can you add this on because of X, Y, and Z, right? And they usually had a good reason, and I'd be like, you know what, we'll just do that for you. It's no big deal. Well, if you do that 10 times over because you care, and you want your client to be successful, which most people do, I think,
Yeah.
then that starts to add up, and a lot of people will scoff and go, oh, well, then just don't do that. And it's like, cool, but in the moment where I was at in life, I didn't think, no, don't do it, or send them an invoice so it was things like that, right? And those things stacked up, and it was not on the forefront of my mind, right? It was not like I would walk in to the office and say, it feels like we're doing 10 times more because of scope creep. Like, it doesn't work out that
Yeah.
way. It was just, hey, we're going to come in and do the best we can today, make our clients happy. And I'm going to work 8, 10, 12 hours today. And when I get up tomorrow in the morning, I'm going to do the best I can too. So, again, the inputs that were getting the outcome that the client wanted, there was a gap there, right? So what I had to do in my agency, for example, was say, okay, and this is why I became a trainer, such a successful trainer in this stuff, by the way, is I would say, okay, what actually gets the outcome, right? This is a skill that I learned after my first agency,
Right.
right? So during the first agency, I did not have this skill. So hopefully contextually, this makes sense to everybody at this point. So I'm in my first agency and I'm saying, my client is telling me that they want SEO, and I'm going, yes, I have SEO to sell, so I'm going to go ahead and do that for them. Then they go, well, the SEO isn't moving as I'm giving you an example, right? The SEO isn't moving as fast as I thought it would or I expected, Rob, even with all of your expectation setting and all that stuff. Can you do something to make it go faster? That was a really common request that we would get.
Mm.
So we'd be like, well, maybe some blog articles would speed it up and send a signal to Google, but it's out of our control. We don't know what Google's going to say. Well, how much is that going to cost me? It's like, well, it's $50 an article, and we can have it done by next month or something like that.
Right.
Does that make sense? So now we're going down this rabbit hole together, and none of it, like the conversation was never around like, okay, what is the actual goal? Like, because a lot of these people, they just wanted more customers,
Sure.
right? And so for me, I was like, um I was like, SEO will lead to more customers. It just takes time and blah, 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 blah. Right.
Sure.
So, but this is the thing. The thing that I had to learn sort of the hard way was that there are very, very few inputs that actually get the outcome that the client wants. Right. So think about that for a second. If your client comes to you and throws 30 grand at you for a website, let's just say, or even 20 or even 10, and you're like, you do need a new website. And the reason is I want more customers. Your client is high as a kite. And I can say that to people now without batting an eye. But at the time, back then, I didn't understand that. I didn't understand why. I didn't understand the skill set that it takes to have this kind of conversation, right? So back then, I'd be like, happy to do your $30,000 website, you know, and then they go, well, send me a proposal. And then I'm stuck doing hours and hours and hours for
Yeah.
a proposal for a thing that does not even move the needle for their business
Right.
that they want to pay $30,000 for.
Right. Because they
So
think they need it or whatever, but it really doesn't help what they actually want, which is clients.
exactly. So what changed? Like, so then the next natural question is like, what is the skill? It's like, you have to be brutally honest about what actually gets people um, to become a customer for your client, right? And a lot of times they are parroting or mimicking things that they're just hearing in the marketplace from their competitors or their employees, or maybe they read something and they're coming to you saying, I'm self-writing a prescription. Well, you have to become a little bit more like a doctor and be like, well, hold on a second. You're coming into my doctor's office saying you have cancer, write me a prescription for cancer. Before we, you know, oops, um, I don't know why he keeps doing this, man.
Don't
Sorry.
worry about it. No, go on. Carry on.
So, but before we cut you open, right, for surgery, what we're going to do is uh, we're going to actually figure out, we're going to diagnose, right?
Cool.
We're going to take some time, do some tests, figure out what the actual problem is. And then before we dump a bunch of chemo into you or cut out your heart or your liver or your lungs or something that you need to stay alive,
Yeah.
right? Like, we need to get something that get some sort of like real positive data that shows like what the actual problem is,
Sure.
right? So I think that like a lot of people skip that step, and I certainly did for a real long time.
Mm.
And the thing about it is, after a while, you start to realize exactly what people want versus exactly what they need, right? And this is the thing that happened to me when I started niching down. So the reason why we were so successful in the gym niche, right, was because the gyms were like, we figured out what gyms actually wanted and needed, and we realized that there was a huge gap there.
Right.
And so when we came in, no one knew who we were as gym agency people. But we figured that out so well, right? We would come in and go, I know exactly what you want, right? And we know how to give you exactly what you need. And those things were 2 to 3 things. It was not 100 things like we were doing before.
Right.
It was not a conversation. It was more us saying, tell us this, this, and this about your business. If those things are how we've seen all the other businesses, then we know exactly what to prescribe to you. So we can get you that help really, really quick,
Right.
really quick. And that's when everything changed for us, because we stopped doing the 99 things that weren't producing results, right? So we stopped doing all those things because they don't move the needle. They're just vanity
Right.
metrics. They're vanity activities, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And then so then we got really, really good at those 2 to 3 things that move the needle for the client. So we increased our prices.
Right.
We had the same scope of work for every client that came into our ecosystem, and we did that 535 times. It was literally the same ad, the same landing page, the same nurture and follow up sequence, the same database reactivation
Yeah.
for every single client that came in.
Yeah.
And that was enough to fill their pipeline with what they wanted, which was new
Which was new
customers.
customers.
Gym owners call them members.
For sure. And I think that's a super valuable thing as well, because oftentimes, people throw the word value around a lot. And so oftentimes, and you see this a lot in the coaching consultancy space, which again is the space I'm in, but I imagine it's directly translatable also to agency and the kind of stuff that you're talking about right now. People think that value is quantity of stuff, right? So it's like
Correct.
come and join this like program, and they give you an infinitely large thing that's just massively overwhelming and doesn't actually help you. Or in the case of agency, just like you were saying before, you have infinite things, like 100 things, whereas value, at least in my eyes, actually is what is the simplest and fastest way that I can get the thing that I actually want, right?
Yeah.
And so for you,
Yep.
that was, just you run the play that works, charge well for it
Hmm.
because it works well, and build a
Yep.
replicable system internally where you can do that 535 times.
Yes.
Awesome.
Yep.
I love it.
Yeah. And so, and to be transparent with everyone, when I sold that agency, it was not a home run. It was not like not enough to retire on.
Right,
But the only reason why it was even sellable in the first place was because of our recurring revenue and because of our repeatable system,
right,
right? That was the only reason why anyone was even remotely interested
for sure.
in buying it, right?
Yeah,
So now we have, if you fast forward now, we've got this great tool called High Level, and you can run that same playbook in record speed. I mean, you can literally like in under a day be running the same playbook that we did, right? And and when you go out there into the marketplace, you don't have to try the 99 things with each client anymore,
yeah,
right? You can go out and just do the one, two, or three things that move the needle the most for them, and then you have options. You have optionality. You can say, well, I really love web design, so yeah, I'll just pick and choose who I can do that for.
sure.
Um, but now I know, now I'm like the utility bill, right? Like if they quit my service, the lead flow stops. That's very painful.
Right,
It's similar to like you want to kind of become as close as you can to them feeling like they don't have power or running water if they shut you off,
100%. Yeah,
right?
the tap gets
Like,
turned off and everything grinds to a halt, which is great for you, for someone who is building monthly recurring revenue, because you can actually just add to it month upon month upon month, and it keeps churn really
yeah,
low, right? So
right.
great.
Yeah. Yep. So,
Yeah,
if you really care about and this is a great example, by the way, because like there's a lot of people who run this playbook and they just don't give a shit about their clients and their churn is like a month, 2 months,
right,
right? And so all of this is assuming that you actually care and that you put effort into this and you want to get results for your client, by the way.
right,
Like that's another contextual piece that is important for me to, for people to understand.
sure.
Um, so for example, now a lot of my recurring revenue comes from, um, onboarding people onto the high level platform and I earn a commission every time I do that successfully, right?
Hmm.
Well, for me, I don't want to just, have a bunch of trials where people aren't successful on it and quit and churn out before they even like,
Sure.
a month even passes. So I treat it as if those people are relying on me to get their first win, right? And when those people get their first win, they stay for a month and that buys us another month to go and get them another win, right?
100%.
And hopefully by the time that like month 2 and 3 roll around, the recurring revenue for them is starting to stack, and so they're not considering
Right.
quitting high level anymore, for example, or quitting the software. They're thinking about ways that they can expand on their monthly recurring revenue,
100%.
and that's been the difference between me and all the other affiliates, with rare exception, is we've really sort of treated it as if high level was our software that we were onboarding people onto,
Yeah,
right? So we took a larger amount of ownership over that process in order to ensure that more people stay on the platform than not, and we really give them the tools and resources and implementation help they need
for sure.
to to be more successful quicker on that whole front. So there's lots of ways to build monthly recurring revenue. It doesn't mean that it's necessarily easier. I think that's the thing that most people are attracted to, is it seems easier, right? It's like, oh, just get someone to sign up and they'll pay forever. There's studies out this on there. You can charge like up to 10 times more for a one-time startup fee
Right.
for just about anything, right? So the recurring stuff, it there are benefits to it for sure, but the hardest part is that first part. It's the most expensive part. It's the part where you're sacrificing that 10 times more value of like a setup fee or whatever the case may be. So
Right.
you're kind of giving up a lot to shoot for the MRR. So the monthly recurring revenue that you're shooting for, that elusive recurring revenue, you better be sure that you have some sort of plan to get that that customer to stay for a long time, because what you're giving up on the other side of it is that now money, right?
100%.
And that's the part that nobody talks about,
For
right?
sure, and I think that's a super important point. You see it as well in the coaching consulting space. It's really interesting that it happens in the software space. I was already aware of that, and actually one of the things that I knew set you apart was your viewpoint on this. And one of the things that you see
Yeah.
in the coaching consultancy space is a lot of people that focus on monthly recurring revenue primarily within coaching and consultancy. They'll just bang out like just pay it over the year sort of thing, and they're missing out on
Yeah.
a lot of stuff. Like the front end, you should be collecting cash up front and then having trail itself,
Yes.
like it's fine, but the volume that you're dealing with might not be high enough to really get you the places that you want to go fast enough, right?
Right.
And that's really
Yeah.
interesting. But so one of the things I wanted to ask you is, because we spoke about this, so say that you were speaking to someone who is newer in the game, and for the sake of putting it really into your context, it's either an agency or someone who wants to build monthly recurring revenue. What would you
Sure.
say is like, not necessarily like the one big tip, but just a good viewpoint to go into this with, and some good first steps to start executing and starting to see results?
Yep. So, gosh, I could talk for hours and hours on this one, but really, the thing that I think probably the best tip that's universally applicable is to productize whatever you're doing. In other words, this is counterintuitive, but cut everything that you can, right? Like most people think that more is better, put it that way. And so when you're looking to build recurring revenue, let's say it's a service, because you can do this with services too, right?
Yeah,
It doesn't have to be software or a subscription model or anything like that. You can just, it's like a retainer. The most common thing in agencies is like, hey, I'm shooting for monthly retainers, right? So how do you nail that? Well, that's the model that we ran with our fitness agency. To boil that down, you want to either be the top of the market, like the most expensive option, but know those 2 to 3 things and be like, "This is all you get," right? We know that it's super valuable though, and it's outcome based typically. So you're gonna get the outcome that you want, and we're gonna be in charge of running that playbook for you, but we're not doing your website, we're not touching your website, we're not gonna do your social media, we're not gonna do it's like the list of things that you're not gonna do is way higher,
sure.
right? So this is called productizing, meaning you're almost making it to where like here's a good exercise. If you're going to sell something 535 times like we did, you should have a checkout page that lists everything they get that does not change, right? And that will tell you if your service is productized or not. In other words, can you offer that same like service that's got the exact same deliverables in it to each client that you talk to?
Yeah,
Yes or no?
I love that.
Right. So if you can do that, then your service is productized. If you have to change line items every time you send an invoice out or create a checkout or collect money or whatever the case may be, you're not productized. That's probably the easiest way to tell, right? So if you're the most expensive option in the market, but it's outcome based and it's productized, you're gonna win, right? You're gonna have super high margins. You're gonna have a repeatable process you can teach to others. The sales process is going to be the same, the onboarding process is going to be the same, the fulfillment process is going to be the same. Like think about that,
Yeah, it's huge.
right? So versus whatever else you're doing now. Okay, so that's drastically different, drastically better. Then there's a big gap called the middle, and I hate the middle. Stay out of the middle. That's you know the middle is where everyone else is fighting for custom work and invoicing clients and sending proposals and bidding and like all this other garbage that I never want to do for the rest of my life again. So that's my preference. It might not be yours. Maybe you like that stuff. Cool. If you are, I'm not. Um, that's just my preference,
Yeah,
right? Then you've got this other area which is acceptable to me, and I've got a friend Mike Cooch who teaches this brilliantly. He's on this side of the spectrum when he teaches this, right? He says you have to either be the most expensive or be the cheapest option in the market, but have it be fully automated,
right.
meaning there's no, but it's the same stuff. It's you get this. The list of what you don't get is way longer. You can expect this activity, not this outcome, but this activity. So a good example of this is hey, I'm a small business owner, and I know that I should be posting every day on social media. I just don't have time to do it. I just want to check the box and go to sleep at night knowing that's done.
Right.
I'm happy to pay someone $99 a month to make sure it's done for me. Right. So that's something that you can sell. That's productized. In other words, every small business owner on the planet pretty much can use the same content that you create one time per month.
Mm.
Your hundreds or thousands of customers can go out and use that, and you sell it on a monthly subscription. Mike's been extremely successful with that model,
Awesome.
and he teaches it really well, right? But the middle area is death. It's literally death. You will die. Like, you will live fewer years
Yeah.
from the stress.
Yeah, voluntarily.
I'm already bald. I'm already bald and gray, guys. If you can't see me, I'm telling you right now, I look older than I probably am. I'm 44, but
You're looking
people
young,
are a
dude.
little
You're
bit
looking.
like,
I mean,
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
33 and I'm bald, so you're definitely.
There you go. Yeah,
It's
yeah.
fine. Don't worry. So I
So,
think
I
it's
mean,
really interesting what you're saying then. Like if we pull out the commonalities between both of those things, both at the top scenario and bottom scenario, it is a replicable process. And
yeah,
either of those sound much more fun than custom things in the middle, trying to compete and not having a productized service. So it sounds like
yep,
that's the number one thing. Productize, make sure that you can do it over and over and over again, and either do it
yep,
en masse, like lots of times over, say thousands of times over, with basically no manual input at any point, or do it tens to perhaps 100 times over, perhaps with a team or whatever, but there is more manual input and it's a kind of done for you sort of play. Right.
yes,
I love that.
yeah. That's like the easiest framework I can describe with, a reasonable amount of time in front of
Yeah.
us, right? There's other things I could talk about and variances, but
Yeah.
this is, that for probably for almost everybody listening to this, that's what they should consider doing, right?
For sure. I
Um,
love that.
the other thing I should say real fast about it, and this just because I think that it's helpful, is, um, you might not feel like so you have to be careful about false positives too, right? Like, there's a lot of people out there who will say, dude, like, go do that $30,000 website and then just add this on at the end because it's not that much money, right? But again, that false positive could be something where it makes you feel so good that you lose sight of the thing that actually makes the most sense long term,
Sure.
right? So you have to be careful with how you think about this decision making tree, because it's really easy to just go, ooh, immediate gratification is right over there if I just do this, right? And get off my plan. And so you have to get good at sort of like realizing what's important and what is not. And then being brutally honest, meaning like both on the market side, so what the clients want and are willing to pay for, and what you ultimately want out of this thing on this side too. You have to build skills in both areas
That's
to
right.
really like nail this whole thing, right?
100%.
Because what happens is your preferences change over time. Like, for example, I'll give you a quick example of this. When I first started high level, I was being, promoting high level. I was already doing workshops, but I was only doing like 2 per year because I was still actively running my agency. And so they were small, and people paid like $5,000 per seat to come jam with us for 3 days. They basically downloaded our whole agency blueprint. And now we had this really cool tool that made it better, faster, easier, cheaper, all that good stuff, right? So at the beginning, I literally sold a course that was, I think I charged $500, which was the cheapest that it ever was, based on the outcomes from those workshops. And so that was my first swing at ever really making a course. And I made these courses that I was selling in an effort to promote Go High Level. So it was basically like, hey, we've got this magical new tool and everything, but here's the skill set, the service, the plugins, the snapshots that you need to really make this thing go so you can run our proven playbook faster
Right.
out there in the marketplace, right? So over time, we sold several different iterations of that course, and it up until last year, the way that we taught it changed a bunch of times, but up until last year, it was basically like we would sell the course with a little bit of coaching like on it. So, people could come up and see live classes, and we're selling it on like a recurring revenue basis. Right. So, my preference was our team got too big. It was bloated. We had a full sales department, had a sales manager, closers, setters, a sales coordinator, a funding partner,
Right.
and it was just crazy. I mean, we did like $3 million a year in coaching, but I was like, I'm not enjoying this anymore.
Right.
Right. And so the market still sort of wanted what I had, but my self-awareness was telling me that like I should shut this thing down. The money isn't as important as me, like my happiness, my day-to-day
Right.
happiness and my long-term happiness. And I had some health issues going on that kind of like spurred this as well, right? But I was like, people are going to tell me crazy, but I'm just going to shut that whole thing down. And so for like 6 or 9 months, we didn't sell a single course. I don't think it's more like 9 months probably.
Right.
Um, and I just decided, hey, I'm just going to give more stuff away for free, right? Like our secrets, our strategies, our training videos on YouTube. So I just fired up a YouTube channel this year. It's people probably laugh at me because it's so bad. It's just like I'm just like failing through it, right? Um, but and then I'm like, if people want help with the implementation, they can come to me, and we've got a program for that where
Right.
we'll help them click buttons and help them get through it quicker than they could on their own.
Right.
It's all still recurring revenue focused though. So even though people have seen us change our program and the way that we're offering it and everything like that, if you took an x-ray of the model behind it, it would still be the exact same recurring revenue model that we've always pursued in that same productized way, where we're very clear on what the deliverables are, and we know the things that move the needle at this point, so we're just going to give them that.
Right.
And all the extra stuff that all these other people offer, we don't offer at all, right? And so again, I think that this is a skill set to build, not a like a tactic to get attached to.
Sure.
Does that make
Sure.
sense?
Yeah.
Like, because if you can nail this and you can get better at it over time with each decision that you make, because like let's be honest, in business, it's not like marriage or having children or like other lifelong commitments. Like in business, what's working this year could very well not be working next year.
Right.
In a business partner relationship, there's an end date sooner than later,
Right.
almost all the time, right? And in the technology that we're using, right, that's changing even now, like with AI and stuff. That's changing like day by day. It's not even like year
Maybe.
by year
Yeah.
anymore, right? And so, to me, it's important to build the skill because sometimes, and it's getting more common these days. Sometimes the tactic or the exact thing that you're doing or looking at will change, and that's out of your control, and that might mean that you have to pivot a little bit. So don't don't get attached to the tactic or that thing that is on the MRR. Learn the model, learn the skill set of how to develop it so that every time you make a decision in your business, your recurring revenue stays or increases.
Right.
That's really the key. Does that make sense
It
to
makes
you?
huge amount of sense, and I think it's kind of like what I call value-based business decisions, right? Like you know what
Yeah.
you want out of it, and so the decision's got to align with the value. You're not trying to fit in the value into the decision that you've made already, right? So it's
Yeah.
like, and
Yeah.
I really like that because I think a lot of people I've certainly done this. I still get the little voice sometimes going, "Shiny object, jump! There's the thing. There's
Yeah.
like a wave you
Yeah.
should ride. This looks way easier than the thing that you're doing." Like all of this sort of stuff.
For sure.
And
Yeah.
the
Which is
nice
human.
go on.
Yeah, and look, like you have to. I think something that really helped me was one of my mentors, my recent mentors. So this is a different guy. He's like, look, you have to realize that we're all biased, right? We all have bias. We all have preference, right? And that's not only is that not a bad thing, but it's sort of silly to act like we're unbiased about everything that comes across our plate in life.
Right.
It's ridiculous if you start to think about it. So just get over that part and be like, I do have bias. So then you go, okay, well, that naturally cuts down decisions, right? Like my preferences get smaller. I'm not going to try to do everything out there. And that is a good thing to realize about yourself, right? And then, so what you just mentioned one, okay, I know that I enjoy the shiny object thing.
Mm.
Okay, cool. So how do you create a decision making matrix or framework around that, knowing that you are like that, right? So, this is something to work on is to say, I know that I have a bias for shiny objects because it does look better, blah, blah, blah. And even though I really know that it's not that how it
Yeah.
works, really, I mean, how many things really have been like that much of
Yeah.
a cheat
Yeah.
code, just jumping ship, right?
100%.
Like very few. Yeah. So you realize that about yourself, step one. Step two is to go, okay, how can I make a decision-making framework that gives me the most amount of upside with the least amount of downside, right? So the most amount of upside, the least amount of downside. And when you put it into a box like that, it gets super clear super fast. Like an example of that would be, okay, is worth jumping to the new shiny object thing for V. So you kind of have to like observe yourself a little bit, right?
Yeah.
It sounds a little woo woo, but it
Yeah.
works. For V, for my life, does jumping to the shiny object get me closer to my goal of $100,000 a month in recurring revenue monthly? Does it get me closer to that or farther away from that? Right. And so, and you have to think about it. So it's a critical thinking skill that you have to develop over time. And it's like a muscle. You get better at it, you get stronger as you go. But that will help you arrive at the answer that's best for
For
you.
sure.
Because maybe it does on this one. Maybe you're like, dude, it's AI. It's new. It's AI. Like, the train's leaving the station. I want to be on it. And yeah, I do think the upside is worth the potential downside. In fact, the upside's so stacked, I kind of can't see how I would lose on this, even if I failed
Right.
like 10 times. On the 11th one, it would be such a home run that little bit of downside and maybe missing out on some MRR for 6 months,
Yeah.
that's worth it for me. Right. Or maybe you're like, this kind of feels like everything else. Like to me, AI feels like everything else. Everyone's like freaking out about email, freaking out about SMS messaging, freaking out about webinars,
Mm.
different tools that have come out over the time. Like I'm old. I've been doing this for 20 years. So like I've seen this before, and I'm like, I'm going to let everyone else figure it out for 6 months. And then these cool tools based on AI are going to rise to the surface. And I'm going to try to look for people that I know, like, and trust,
Right.
who know what they're doing with this stuff to feed me and do all that research themselves.
Right.
I'm cool. So I'm just going to focus on my MRR, and then whatever AI opportunities come to me, I'll plug them in if that makes sense at that time later down the road.
Yeah. I like that.
Right? But that's my decision making framework. Like, so you see how that's like, I hate it when people give blanket advice out of context for what
Sure.
individuals want. I think Gary Vee does a pretty good job of that, and others who are like
Yeah.
talking to someone in the context of what's going on in their life. Like I love that part because it's arrogant for me to sit here and assume that you want what I want
Sure.
for my life,
Sure.
right? And in business, there's so many options. It's an endless sea of options,
Yeah.
right? It's never going to be boring on that
Yeah.
front. There's always going to be new
Yeah.
opportunities.
Yeah.
So how do we
I think
navigate
it's
without
really
losing our dang
interesting.
mind?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting
Yeah,
just what you were saying before, and I feel like it's part of the like ethos of monthly recurring revenue. I think maybe is that because you're not experiencing and this. So this is me speaking from. I'm like looking back to 2 years ago. What we were doing, we were selling high ticket only. We weren't looking at monthly recurring revenue. We were living that life, and we had
yeah,
some what were at the time felt like amazing months, followed by
yep,
crushingly bad months. And so one of the things that it did, I'm thinking about it now, just speaking of self awareness and stuff, is it never created a long term vision that actually felt in any way sustainable. And so what that
yeah,
does is it just feels like you're being hunted by a lion the whole time, even on the good months, right? So the lion's
yeah,
gotten a bit further away, but there's a lion coming, right? So like it's
yeah,
that, and I feel that it's living in that frame of this. We have to solve this problem now, the action now that causes people to jump on the trains, whereas you're like, okay, cool, well, I'm not in a rush. I'm just going to focus on my monthly recurring revenue game. In 6 months'
yeah,
time, when you've had the blood, sweat, and tears and you figured it out, I'll pay you to help me. Right?
yeah, exactly. And there's people who love bleeding edge stuff, and that's what you know they enjoy. I know plenty of people like
Yeah,
that. And I'm not trying to tell them to be more like me. I'm just
sure.
trying to educate them on, you know, how they can um, move through that without suffering as much. So for me, I'm like MRR heavy. Like basically, if it's rare when I take money, like people try to pay me consulting fees all the time, like one-time consulting fees or whatever the case may be, and I usually say no to everything. I'm like, just join my recurring revenue program. That's usually what I say,
Right,
and they're like, but like, and I'm like, well, dude, I don't want to, number one, create another thing. Number two, go outside of that list of expectations. Even though I might be missing out on a bunch of now money, it's just worth my peace of mind for you to know that those expectations are exactly what my expectations are, and my whole team knows about it, and it's not disrupting anything, and
right.
I'm not going to bed going like, hey, did that person get taken care of in some sort of special way because I made a different promise to them, right? Like that's very valuable to me. If you're in a different place in life, like I was like 10 years ago, I probably would have taken that money and been like, I'm okay with that right now. But now I'm not, right? So that changes over time too. Your preferences change over time because we're not a tree. I mean, if we were a tree, things would probably be a lot easier. But like I went through like a having babies phase. I was super motivated, and then we moved from California to Alabama, and so that was like a different set of challenges, and so I wanted different things out of my business, which it was a big reason why I sold my agency.
Right.
And then COVID hit, and everyone freaked out, of course, when that happened initially, and that was a big test for me to see sort of if I could stick to my guns,
Right.
and I was able to largely through that. But once things kind of got back to quote unquote normal um, after COVID, I really felt like I was in my stride. Like I was like, this feels good to just keep booking the recurring revenue because those months where I was not booking anything new, I was still getting paid that nice MRR
Right.
when I basically had no new money coming in for like 3 months at
Right.
least, right? So I felt like I want more of that in the future. I'm covering more for uncertainty the older I get. My kids are 10, 8, and 6 now. So in another decade, they'll be sort of like end of high school, probably in college sort of phase of life.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll probably have different preferences then. But right now, I feel like the more that I invest into stacking the MRR, the better I'm going to feel when that time comes.
Right.
That's my thesis right now about 10 years down the line, right?
Yeah.
So it's a trip, man, to sit here and talk about business like 5 years, 10 years down the line. To me is refreshing because a lot of people don't talk about it, they don't think about it, they don't have a plan for it.
Right.
They're just sort of like grind hard, bro scale until
Bro scale. I love that.
yeah,
Bro
you know
scale
what
all
that
day.
is?
I love
You
it.
described it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, yeah.
That's super interesting. And like
So
you've dropped so many thoughts, I think, and certainly I find super interesting, right? Because I'm in comparison to you, I'm at the inception of the MRR journey, and so one of the things about MRR Secrets that I really want to do is just I think this is a different perspective on business, but actually also life. It's not just like a business perspective. I think this is a life perspective. It's got a longer term vision. It has a calmness in it that I think a lot
yeah.
of people are missing. And we were speaking about bro scale. The reason it makes me laugh is that I've spent 75%, no, definitely more than that, probably 85% of my business life bro scaling, and it was an
Oh,
absolute nightmare. Like as I said,
yeah.
even when we had good months, we were like enjoying the moment, but thinking in the head in the back of my head, I'm like, well, I know that next month starts at zero, right?
Yeah.
And that
Oh, totally.
feeling, and I think
Yeah.
maybe age does this. Like life has been more complicated. I think as I've gotten older, as we take on more responsibility, whatever we have kids, we get married. There's we. I think certainly for myself, maybe it's not true for everyone, but I find myself looking more at what's going to generate security so that when bad stuff happens, because it's not a question of if, it's when. I'm not being like a downer or anything. It's just the longer you're around, the more likely you are to experience some sort of hardship,
Yeah.
right? And so the
Yeah.
question is, when that thing happens, are you also going to be worried about money or are you not? And I'd just rather
Right.
not worry about money when that thing happens because there's more important stuff like what's happening in that moment, right?
Yeah.
And even just thinking about, well, if you're always worried about money, never mind the bad stuff, where are you in your head when the good stuff's happening? One
Exactly.
of the moments for me, and then we'll wrap this up, that really shook me. I think this was my come to Jesus moment when it came to my monthly recurring revenue when I proposed to my now fiance. So she said yes. So that's wonderful news. But
Woo.
we went on like a engagement honeymoon. So we went to the Canary Islands, which is part of Spain here in Europe, and I was just super stressed the whole time we were on there. And I was like, I'm more worried about money than I am out of my mind enjoying the fact that I have a fiance and we're on a holiday in the Canary Islands. And when I was weighing up those things, it slapped me in the
Right.
face really hard. I was like, your equation for what makes you happy in life is out of whack for sure. And the
Yeah.
things that
Oh,
you think
totally.
in the moment you place value on, let's say the like fast hit of a high ticket sale or whatever, like you're doing a custom website, whatever kind of example we've been speaking about, that hit lasts until you're used to the fact that that money's in your bank account. And now 5 minutes later, when you've come down, you feel sad again. Right?
Yeah.
So it's
Totally.
very short term, even large chunks of money, like you get used to it in like 15, 20 minutes.
Totally. Yeah.
So that's really
And 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 you could do a whole hour on that with like a psychotherapist or
mm,
on that why that is.
yeah,
But that's totally a thing. I'll just leave people with this too because I think it's good to sort of talk about getting started because that is the hardest part,
yeah,
right? And I think that it's like how do you get both out of life, right? Like so how do you get that sense of like recurring revenue building that compounding and how do you start building it now from zero or from scratch, right? And I think the key there, man, is just to find things that you can do where you spend an hour or two, so you install them once, and then they're largely or completely automated thereafter, right? So again, think about you becoming the utility bill. Like when people from the utility companies go on vacation, people still get their power, they still get their water, they still get their, you know, sanitary, whatever, the trash man still comes, right? Um, so how can we do that in business? Well, there's lots of ways to do that. Again, there's like millions of ways to do that. But if you can figure out what takes work one time that you get paid on over and over and over again because the system is doing the heavy lifting, your system, then then you're gonna be able to be more present when you go on that honeymoon or your engagement honeymoon or you're going to be able to take a nicer trip that leaves you less stressed like instead of doing a budget trip,
yeah,
you're able to do a few things that make it a little more enjoyable for you guys. Or, you're able to actually take periods off. Like this is my goal for next year is for us to take like the whole month of August and, the last 2 weeks of December fully off for all of my employees
wow,
too. Right. And there's only 4 of us now, but it's been a goal of mine to just be able to just do that and have a proper break
yeah,
for everybody and just be like, dude, we're closed for August, you know?
I love that.
Um, and so, but that's where it starts is you go, okay, I'm going to help one person install one thing that I'm going to spend an hour or two with them on. And then once that thing's turned on, as long as they don't turn it off, I'm going to leave it on. They're going to leave it on. The bill keeps getting paid every single
Yeah,
month. Right. That's kind of the key. And you just start with one person and you say, I'm going to do one a week. And then if you need more to increase the velocity, you're going to do 2 a week. And maybe you hire someone to get some help and you do 4 a week or whatever the case may be.
yeah,
Right. But that's kind of how it starts. And if you can't turn something on and still get paid for it, that's probably a pretty good signal. It's not a good candidate to build recurring revenue with.
I love that.
Right.
Cool.
So
That's a
hopefully
perfect
that's
finish, I think. So just before we wrap this up, where can we find
Mhm.
you? What have you got going on? How do we work with Rob Bailey if we want to?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a free group. We've got most of our best content is in there. We're always uploading more of it. We've got over 10,000 videos. So it's kind of like trying to narrow it down for you guys so you don't get fire hosed in the face. But got as of today, we've got like 3,200 people in our community. It's got a bunch of awesome people in there, which is the most important part. It's not full of spammers or anything like that. And then there's a classroom in there with a free training on all the stuff that I talked about. And then I also have a paid community that's if you want like implementation help with some of this stuff, me and my team will get on with you and do that. But all of that is found in my group. It's robbailey.com/group. And my first name is spelled with two B's. So it's ROBBBAILEY.com/group. So everything's in one spot,
Very cool. Well,
which is great.
that fits the theme, right? Keep it all in one spot. Keep it all
Indeed.
tidy. That's cool. And we will link all of that stuff as well below this video, below this podcast, wherever this thing goes out. So you guys, if you want to go and visit that group, go ahead and do that. Thank you so much for jumping on, Rob. This has been phenomenal. Really, really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, V. Thanks for having me on. And I think it's a great topic to talk about. And there's miles and miles and miles of conversation to be had about it. So I'll do whatever I can to support you on this one, man.
Awesome, dude. Appreciate it.